Party people, thank you so much for joining in to today's webinar. Looking forward to getting in today's content as well. My name is Sam Jenks. I'm the CRO and also SRM expert at Kodiak Hub. Looking forward to digging into the 6-step strategic sourcing flywheel, turning supplier relationships into results. I apologize in advance. I do know that the sound is slightly echoey, considering that we are moving offices at the moment, so our current office does not have a ton of furniture in it, and it's making things, of course, bounce off the walls when somebody talks in an annoying and loud American accent like myself. So I apologize in advance. Nonetheless, so happy that you guys are able to join today's session. Before we get into things, I would love to be able to point you to the direction of the chat line. Hello, Richard Teuchler. That's my colleague. He's saying hi to everyone there. In the chat, you'll see that I have dropped a few notes. The first note being that we are going to have some polls during today's session. So please make sure to keep your voting fingers ready. And we're going to make sure that we poll during the session a few different times on a few different topics. Also, if you do have any questions during today's session, as always, just drop them directly in the public chat, and we'll get around to those questions during the session towards the end of the session, of course, during the Q&A. But if a question comes up, don't wait until the end. You're more than welcome to wait until the end, but feel free also to drop it into the chat line. We will mark it as a question, and then we will answer those during the last 5 to 10 minutes of today's session as well. I would love to heat up the chat line and quickly just, if everybody could be able to give a shout out, a little bit of a hello, and where you're calling in from. I know that we typically have pretty international sessions. I'm calling in from Stockholm, Sweden. I will shoot one in there. Hello, Gustavo from Amsterdam. Nice to have you. Allen, Wisconsin. Nice. Go Green Bay. Berlin. Lauren, hello from Berlin. Guten Tag. Pittsburgh, go Steelers. Hamburg, nice to have you here as well. Edinburgh, Scotland. South Africa, Croatia. Athens, Northampton. My guess is that it's a little bit different weather in Northampton, England than it is in Athens, Greece at the moment. So nice to have those polar opposites in the session. Hello, Blarina from Sweden. Great. Thank you guys so much for heating up the chat line. Again, if you have questions during the session, please feel free to drop them in there. I am going to be presenting off to a second screen, so I won't be looking it directly at the camera. I hope that that's okay for everybody during today's session. And I would love to be able to get into today's content. The runtime for today is probably going to be around 40 minutes. We're going to spend the bulk of the time, of course, focusing on the concept of turning the strategic sourcing flywheel, utilizing our supplier relationships to be able to extract real results. Today's agenda, we will briefly take a look at Kodiak Hub, for those of you that aren't familiar with our organization. We'll also take a second to be able to learn more about what we mean when we talk about turning the flywheel. This is an excerpt from the book, Good to Great by Jim Collins. We're going to take some learnings from the best out there, some organizations that have built flywheels that are significant and impactful in their businesses. We're also going to have a 7-step how-to on crafting your own flywheel that we'll be able to share with everybody in attendance. And then we're going to get into the meat and potatoes, where it's going to be about the 6-step strategic sourcing and SRM flywheel, the flywheel that is looking to turn supplier relationships into real results. And then, like I mentioned before, we're going to have a Q&A at the end of the session. So feel free again to add those questions into the chat line, and we will get around to them when we can towards the end of the session in that 5 to 10 minute Q&A. Awesome. For those of you that do not know about Kodiak Hub, we are headquartered out of Stockholm, Sweden, with an international team based out of the Nordics, UK, DACH, and now expanding into the US market. Hello to my colleagues if anyone's joining in from Boston. We're a suite that our customers love and rave about. Don't take it just from me. Please get out there and do your homework. If you're interested in our solution or any solution in the SRM space, make sure to utilize the awesome assets that exist within Spend Matters, places like Capterra or G2, where you can be able to hear direct social proof from some of our customers about the gains that they've seen from utilizing the Kodiak Hub platform, turning their supplier relationships into results. If you're not familiar with our technology, we are a supplier relationship management suite powered by artificial intelligence and a cloud-based SaaS solution. The solution itself is a modular one, which makes it a box of chocolates. It's everything from the single source of truth in the hub, which has your classic supplier information, data, document management, as well as then also a collaboration space and also reporting. This also then features a suite of different modules, as you see to the left and the right of the hub, for risk screening, as well as then process excellence, everything from initial intake and onboarding to ongoing quality and audit management and performance evaluation. Our focus is to provide a robust and 360-degree platform to manage supplier information, risk, compliance, ESG, performance, and also then, of course, collaboration. We do work with world-class procurement teams, and if you're in attendance, thank you for your trust. We love our customers. We also love working with businesses that have global and complex supply chains where quality matters and speed is critical. Those are two of the components that a lot of our customers share. All right. Before we get into today's session, considering that we are going to be talking quite a bit about the topic at hand, strategic sourcing and supplier relationship management, I wanted to be able to understand a few things. First and foremost, where are you currently in your journey related to supplier relationship management, but also supplier relationship management technology? Are you just now gaining an understanding? Are you currently building momentum internally? Is there an understanding in your organization? Are you actively looking for SRM systems, or have you just adopted? Please feel free to share your answers now in the chat line, and we will then get back to this once everybody has had the time to fill out the poll. Please continue to fill out. I'm not sure if you guys are seeing on your end the percentages. It's actually not tallying the percentages for me here, but it looks as if the bulk, about 60% of individuals, are in an awareness or education phase. There is the tally. Awesome. So about 70% of people in attendance are in awareness and education. Good. A few people are actively looking, and a few people also have systems. I think that everybody can also be able to see the results there. So it's about a 30-70 split. Great to be able to see, and an awesome starting point. So thank you guys for being able to share as well. Another poll that I wanted to be able to shoot your way just before we get into it as well, really briefly. So I wanted to be able to understand, how is your team currently managing SRM? A second item that I think is important for today's session, just to get a baseline understanding of where everybody's maturity is currently at. So if you don't mind, please go ahead and answer the poll that's on screen right now. How is your team currently managing supplier relationship management? It gives a great opportunity to be able to understand, again, where everybody is currently at today. Okay, again, the bulk respondents, it looks like, are utilizing Excel and homegrown solutions. 78% of those that have answered. Seems like only about 50% of the audience has responded. If you have a moment to respond, feel free to do so now. It'd be great, again, to just understand the baseline of where everybody is at today before we get into today's content. Awesome. All right, so we're looking at about 70% of the attendees that are currently utilizing status quo solutions. Nothing strange. We actually did a study last year with ProcureTech, which showed that about 72% of professionals were utilizing homegrown solutions, Excel spreadsheets, SharePoint, and the like to be able to manage their vendors, whereas 28% of the top performers were utilizing modern solutions for supplier relationship management. Hopefully we'll be able to arm you guys with some of the language today, the process, right? Of course, that's most important to strategic sourcing and supplier relationship management, that of course can be able to enhance your opportunities to sell it into your organization as well. So thanks for sharing a little bit more about your current state. I dusted off a book recently. It was sitting on a shelf at our old offices. And this particular book was called Turning the Flywheel by Jim Collins. I'm not sure if people are familiar with Jim Collins, but he authored From Good to Great in 2001. And this was a small excerpt and monograph from that particular book, focusing in on the concept of flywheels and how it is that the model can be able to help businesses to drive forward success by utilizing particular topics or I would say happenings, which then lead into the next, which creates a kind of particular, how would I say, an accelerating model that flies. Now, before we get into the day's content, I was curious in understanding, is everybody here familiar with the concept of a flywheel, or is this your first time hearing about it? Have you maybe read the book, or are you brand new and looking forward to learning? Again, just great to understand where everybody is at within their baseline understanding. Awesome. 86% those that have responded, please feel free to respond to the poll. All right. Someone has read the book. Nice to be able to hear. All right. About 50% of the audience has responded. If you can take a moment to respond, and we'll get into the content. Great. Okay. So seems 80% of attendees are not familiar, but looking forward to learning. So great to be able to hear, and I'm looking forward to share some of the insights as well. This particular book starts with a particular story about a young man named Jeff Bezos. This doesn't look like the Jeff Bezos of 2025, maybe, but this is a picture of Jeff Bezos looking out from their Seattle offices, year 2001. At that point in time, Amazon was a very different company, but Jim Collins had actually just released the book, From Good to Great, and he had also just released the monograph about turning the flywheel as well. He had the opportunity to go and meet with the Amazon team and sit down with them, discussing, I would say, with that team in the midst of a pretty turbulent time in their history, right? It was the .com era bust around the turn of the millennium, and the business was in a pretty turbulent state. They were having to cut heads, and I'm pretty sure that they ended up cutting about 15% of their employees. They sat down and discussed the fact that in any great transformation or change in a business, there is no single defining moment. There is no silver bullet, right? It's a compounding effect in good times and in bad, right? Momentum builds little by little, and in any great business, it's linked, the causation of the tasks and things that happened before. Bezos and his team worked together with Jim Collins to be able to sketch out the Amazon flywheel. And, well, it seems to be working just fine. In 2001, they had survived the .com crash. Their first profitable quarter, they turned towards the end of 2021. They adopted a new retail model, which was beyond books, moving from just being an online reseller of novels to becoming the multi-channel, multi-industry business that they are today, that we all know as Amazon. At that point in time, even though they were in a turbulent time, they were still having around approximately $3 billion in revenue, but they did have to lay off about 15% of their employees due to stock drop. Today, in 2025, they're a truly global organization in various segments. We know them as AWS, Amazon Prime, Amazon Fresh. They've purchased Whole Foods, Twitch, and so many other brands that are huge consumer-facing brands. It's approximated that they have about 310 million customers globally, with 1.5 million employees, both part-time and also full-time, in 100 different countries, with an astronomical revenue stream and also a valuation of 2.5 trillion US dollars. Now, Bezos and his team worked together with Jim Collins to sketch out their flywheel. But obviously, during these tough times, Bezos and his team could have also panicked and abandoned the flywheel, right? This is something that many leaders and businesses do in hard times. They try to pivot drastically or change or find the new thing that's going to help them. And it often can lead to nothing but more disappointment. What does this have to say about, strategic sourcing and supplier relationship management? Well, we're going to get to it, right? But more so than anything, it's about the model itself. The flywheel that Amazon built was determined on compounding effects of causation-based activities that led to more causation-based activities, creating an accelerating model that they stress test over time and, of course, developed upon. But this particular model is still one of the things that Jeff Bezos points back to as one of their primary kind of frameworks for success. It was later revealed, actually, in a 2013 book by Brad Stone, that Jeff Bezos considered the application of this particular flywheel some of the secret sauce in the hard times that they experienced around the turn of the millennium. We all know Amazon today, and the interesting thing is the development of this flywheel back in 2001 still stands today with the different business models that they've adopted, the different channels that they've opened up, lower price offerings, increases the customer visits to their site, which attracts third-party sellers. It allows them to expand and extend their distribution, which grow revenues per fixed costs, and ultimately, of course, it leads to lower prices on more offerings. Each item feeding the next within the flywheel, becoming an overall accelerating model in that case as well. Now, what I wanted to do is to not just talk about a flywheel, but talk about how can we build a flywheel. And in this particular novel, Jim Collins provides 7 really great and easy applicable tasks and steps to crafting your particular flywheel. The thing that's interesting here is that it starts by whiteboarding what are your major wins, but also what are your major failures, comparing and then also synthesizing, well, what do those particular items have in common? Sketching out the flywheel is the next point, drafting a loop. And these should, of course, be steps that drive the next, leading back to the top, which of course closes a cycle and it reinforces itself in some type of accelerating momentum. Once you do that, make sure that, again, you revisit, because you're probably going to have more than 4 to 6 components. Simplify it, consolidate it, right? And then go out there and validate it. Test your model in your business against your successes and your failures, and refine this over time until you really understand, does it work, or are you continuing to break it in that case as well? Now, this doesn't mean that, of course, in any way, shape, or form, that this flywheel needs to stand forever, right? It did work for Amazon, but it's something that we should continuously stress test and validate and calibrate over time to make sure that it still works for our business. And the last element of this is the hedgehog concept, which is a concept that Jim Collins shares, which I think is pretty applicable not only in procurement, but also in business, right? Fitting the flywheel to your organization's strategy, whether that be your procurement organization or your broader organization, you need to ask yourself what you're passionate about, or find what are you passionate about, right? What is your business passionate about? What is it in your business that drives the economic engine? And also, what is it in your business that you can be best in the world at? Where you can be best in the world and your economic engine, that's where your competitive edge lies. That's where your market cap lies. What you're passionate about and what drives the economic engine, well, that's purpose, of course, right? growth is not just a means, right? It's something that, of course, is I would say, the input, whereas something like the purpose is the outcome, right? And what are you passionate about, and what can you be the best in the world at? That's where your motivation can be able to lie. This is the hedgehog concept that you can be able to continue to link back to and understand. The flywheel should be reinforced and fueled by these three particular principles as well. I wanted to share another story that was shared in the book by Jim Collins. In 1989, the Tour de France was very tight. There was an American at that point in time. His name was Greg LeMond, and he overcame a 50-second deficit at the start on the last time trial to win the entire tour by a narrow 8-second victory. This is, I think, one of the more known images of Greg LeMond coming down the Champs-Élysées. Sorry for everybody in France, I'm butchering that particular name of that stretch. Nonetheless, what does he have on his head? Was a Giro helmet. This particular item was the blueprint that was set out by Nike and then readopted by Giro. Giro's flywheel and their founder, Jim Hentis, saw this particular flywheel as an opportunity to be able to invent great products, get great athletes to use them, inspire normal people, right? The weekend warriors, those people that are out in their lycra suits and biking around on the countryside, which would then attract mainstream customers, building the brand, which would then allow them to set high prices, and of course, put more money back into R&D, which then feeds into inventing great products. Again, a flywheel that feeds itself each particular step, driving the momentum of the next particular step as well. Two particular flywheels that we can be inspired by, two businesses that we can be inspired by, two organizations that have had their flywheel as the accelerant that has also stood the test of time as well. What I wanted to say to you guys in procurement is congratulations. Procurement, sourcing, and supply chain, you guys are mission critical. It's a shame that it took a global pandemic and resource shortages globally, as well as also geopolitical turmoil. But everybody recognizes that procurement, sourcing, and supply chain, you guys are in the driver's seat now, right? This is a VUCA market. It is super volatile. It's super uncertain. And I've been hearing a lot of professionals say that during this time, we need to be able to bear down. And one of the things that I've been hearing over and over again at procurement leaders when I was in Austin, Texas, at Cieva Friends when I was in Chicago, from my team that's in the UK, the DACH region, as well as the Nordics, I keep hearing one thing over and over. Procurement is getting back to the basics. A lot of business professionals that I'm talking about is saying that the basics or the focus on simplicity is exactly what you need in the hard times, right? To be able to weather the storm. This concept is actually exactly what made me go and dust off the book, Good to Great. And it made me to be able to start looking into these particular concepts of why good businesses stand the test of time through hard times and through good ones as well. And it was only when I started reading through this particular excerpt from Good to Great that I thought to myself, and it hit me, this particular flywheel format, I've seen this before. It's a guideline and a framework that I recognize, right? And it wasn't just because I had read through the book prior. It was because it resonated as something else in that case. That's something else I couldn't quite put my finger on. But before I wanted to dig into it, I wanted to understand here. What are your procurement's biggest priorities right now? In your particular organization, if you're getting back to basics, which of these particular basics are the absolute most important for your organization right at this moment in time? Take a moment to be able to answer on the poll here. What is currently your biggest concern or priority? What's on your whiteboard? What is your biggest KPI currently? And this is super interesting because what I'm seeing here is costs and spend savings and resource efficiency. And this is what we're hearing from the team. that we're talking to, right? Do more with less, faster. That's typically kind of the I would say the rhetoric that we're hearing from the market at the moment, right? And that's what everybody is being expected to do. And it's a challenging time to be able to do so as well. So very interesting that everybody in this particular session is feeling the exact same thing. What this made me think about when I was reading through Good to Great is another model, a model that is much older than the flywheel model of 2001. It's called the Shewhart cycle, right? And the Shewhart cycle was made famous by an American physicist who popularized this. It was the plan, do, check, act model. Not really any sexy stuff. In fact, I'm pretty sure that it was adopted by some other physicists later, who then made it famous by actually calling it the plan, do, study, act, right? Regardless, this is another self-propelling model that can very easily be able to directly link back to supplier management in a lot of ways. And let me show you how. In SRM, every single touch point of the relationship is crucial, right? The way that we look at supplier relationship management, and a lot of organizations that we're talking to, is that you set goals, you assess and audit, you evaluate, you approve and innovate. And from the improvement and innovation, you set new goals, right? And it becomes a life cycle approach to the relationship management rather than something that is a start and a finish. It's on a continuum, and it's self-feeding in that case, continuously focused on getting better. That's why it's a life cycle, a relationship management, not just a management. So with that being said, I had gotten inspired and thought to myself, well, if there's a flywheel out there to be able to be built for Amazon or for Jira, well, why can't we be able to build a flywheel for supplier relationship management? And therefore, this leads into the next part of the session, which is the 6-step strategic sourcing flywheel, driving supplier relationships into real results. And the model itself is actually only 5 items within the flywheel, because I had to, like anyone does within the hedgehog method, make sure that I link back to those 3 particular items. But also, as we saw in those 7 steps, I needed to be able to edit away some of the steps that I had initially put in. So step number 1 actually starts outside of supplier relationship management or strategic sourcing. And this starts with you, right? It's a model that's as old as time within business, making sure that there is alignment within your people, your processes, and your technology, right? Because what we're going to talk about today is very focused on process and technology. But ultimately, the resource efficiency items, cost and spend savings, these elements are equally so not going to be easy without having the right people on board that have clarity and alignment with your process, that are data-driven because they're being guided by good tech. Of course, good automation and augmentation can happen when process and tech is aligned, but it's really the people that, of course, are going to drive these initiatives in your business that are the priorities that everybody has indicated are on your whiteboards at the moment. So beyond step number 1 of PPT, what are the 5 steps within the SRM flywheel? I took the opportunity to be able to draft up this flywheel where it starts by setting the scene, the strategy, the segmentation, and understanding what are and who are the suppliers that you are working with. It starts by segmenting those suppliers and shaping the category strategy. This allows you, of course, to assess relevant risk, right? Not just broad scoping risk or due diligence, but relevant risk and due diligence, which allows you to negotiate contracts and onboard and qualify the right suppliers who have the propensity to be able to perform, where you then audit their quality, track their performance, and analyze their spend in order to correct, develop, harvest, and innovate with the best suppliers over time, which allows you to then continue your segmentation and setting your category strategy on a continuous basis. A self-propelling model that helps us to be able to frame the best supplier relationships and turn those relationships into results. And the interesting thing about this, it directly aligns to the plan, do, check, act model that, of course, we had talked about before that Stewart popularized in 1920. This particular flywheel, I think, is very well aligned with what a lot of businesses are aiming to do, but don't always have, I would say, the framework to be able to make it happen. So what we wanted to be able to do is to provide some really practical applications of how you can be able to plan, do, check, and act, aligning process to good technology to be able to, of course, drive forward this particular flywheel. The planning, it starts with segmenting the supplier base, making sure that you can segment based upon spend or criticality, risk, commodities, growth potential, and alike. And setting that sourcing strategy is critical to be aligned with your business priorities as well as with your business stakeholders. Now, Kralik is a typical model, right? Developed by Peter Kralik. Some of you maybe use this, some of you potentially use another segmentation model. This is a great way to start your planning, right? Kralik is a classic model which is able to bucket your suppliers into non-critical, leverage, strategic, and bottleneck based upon their profit impact to you and the supply risk of the commodity or category that that supplier is located within. From that, well, then you can be able to understand how do you manage that particular supplier in that particular item of your portfolio. What we believe is important is that you're not just focusing on segmenting your suppliers, but that you're automating that segmentation. Technology can help to guide that, but of course the parameters need to be set by the business together with your organization in your teams, and of course aligned with your strategic goals. This automated segmentation, though, is a rule-based setup that we do together with our customers, and you should be able to, of course, ascertain this with any technology that you would be finding out there on the market for supplier relationship management. It's a kind of if-then methodology, which is then allowing our customers to quickly segment their supplier bases, approve them, not approve them, but also then bucket these suppliers so that they can be able to set their category strategy and also the management of that relationship and life cycle based upon the type of supplier and the segment that they're within. Next, to plan more, but also to start doing, right? The assessment of relevant supplier risk and conducting of due diligence. This is important that we start to evaluate financial health and compliance, ESG, operational and geopolitical risks, to make sure that you are working with the right and risk mitigated partners to make sure that the ones that you start negotiating with, well, those are of course going to make sure that you are working with risk averse partners. In our solution, again, this is where process starts to align with technology. This is how our solution helps our customers to be able to know their supplier, utilizing a 360-degree screening of credit and financial health, contextual risks, as well as reputational risks. It allows our customers to see kind of a zoomed out macro view to understand some of the more, I would say, essential elements of being able to do business. Well, is a company bankrupt? Or for example, are they in the news for the wrong things? These are the types of risk screening that, again, are helping our customers make sure that they're working with vendors that are going to be the right vendors, and that they're going to be able to start negotiating and onboarding suppliers that have a less risk of being able to bring back bad press on their reputation in that case. The next part is to start doing within your contracts, right? Onboarding and qualifying your suppliers and having a robust framework to be able to align on expectations, integrate your suppliers into your systems and your processes, your communication channels, which is laying the operational foundation for your collaboration, but also for your performance management. It sets the scene to let your suppliers know that this is going to be the standards that your customers and also your business expects. This is about intake, onboarding, and qualification. Intake, of course, allowing customers to be able to make sure that the suppliers or, for example, business stakeholders can capture that essential business information, directly moving to an automation of onboarding and supplier assessment questionnaires that can have commodity and category focus, again, making sure that it is relevant to the segment of a supplier driven by the category strategy, which then of course will trigger approval and qualification flows from multi-stakeholder engagement and sign off as well. Again, this is then directly linking back the process to, again, the technology as well. Then it's time to check. course, we have onboarded and qualified and approved suppliers. They start delivering to us. Unfortunately, that's where so many people stop managing the supplier relationship and life cycle. This is the time when you need to ramp things up. You need to track KPIs. What is the levels of implementation out on site? Is there objective evidence for the things that they say that they have within your audits, right? Is there SLA adherence? Is there commercial and contract compliance? Are they living up to your standards related to quality and innovation, delivering on time and in full? This transparency, trust, and a data-driven approach also will then again drive visibility in your organization, but also visibility back to the supplier of what it is that you expect within your relationship as well. Again, if we've done the right things by segmenting suppliers correctly, making sure that we're relevant within our risk management, then we hopefully will have risk-averse relationships that hopefully will land in good quality suppliers. So of course, the tracking of performance and the spend will be a measure that will then hopefully help us to be able to develop upon those good relationships with the right suppliers as well. This is where, of course, our solution has capabilities to help with checking the levels of implementation and objective evidence with our audit solution. You can be able to evaluate performance within a wide set of KPIs driven by qualitative and quantitative data, aggregating up those views of empirical data sets as well as then that experience data set. And then again, linking risk, compliance, ESG, and performance back to the commercial value of your suppliers. It's incredibly crucial that you're not just capturing this information as a tick box, but of course, that it's driving real insights. For example, if a vendor has, for example, a low quality, but a high, for example, performance on their delivery, but you're spending a lot more money than another vendor that has the same capacity, but has much better quality and on the same level of on time and full, well, then of course, you should be able to utilize those as strategic sourcing insights to be able to potentially find an alternative or adjust your line of supply in that case. The last item is to correct, develop, and innovate with the best suppliers. And hopefully these will be the best suppliers if you've done the steps right before, addressing the gaps, co-developing process improvements, fostering the innovation and the strategic alignment that you have, ultimately, hopefully, to be able to transfer those insights that you have with each other to have some type of a measurable and mutual value creation within the relationship as well. Correcting, improving, and innovating, this within itself is a process, right? Good corrective action and improvement management is necessary. That's going to drive your suppliers towards action. And then, of course, you need to be able to make sure that you're tracking that progression. Is your suppliers, in fact, improving over time when it is that you're putting corrective actions or improvements into place for them to be able to improve as well? So with that, it is the strategic sourcing and supplier relationship management flywheel, the one that can be able to start accelerating the way that you are working with your supplier relationships and hopefully also be able to drive those supplier relationships into real results, segmenting suppliers, doing relevant risk assessment, making sure that you're working and qualifying with the right suppliers, following up and checking their quality and their performance, while also the commercial values, and then directly making a loop to ensure that you innovate, develop, and harvest those suppliers ultimately so you can continue that flywheel, again, with additional segmentation and category strategy, feeding back into the loop over and over. So some summary and tips for turning the flywheel. Apply the hedgehog concept and ask, what is your revenue engine? What makes you elite in the market? And what is your passion? Make sure that you keep it simple, 4 to 6 steps. And sometimes also it's good to get back to the basics. PPT has to be in harmony. Don't forget the concept of plan, do, check, act. This is crucial. The mind and process of an engineer, the action of a procurement pro, right? That's the way that I think that we like to think about how you can be able to align your process and your technology that's going to be able to drive real value. And again, to summarize within the strategic sourcing flywheel here again, segment and plan the category strategy so you can be relevant in your risk and due diligence, ultimately making sure that you're able to go to contract, onboard and qualify risk-averse vendors who will be easy to audit, and will be, of course, top performers when you evaluate them. So ultimately, you can improve and innovate, and then ultimately do the whole thing all over again. So thank you very much for your time, your interest, as well as then also your engagement during the session in the different polls that we had. I hope that we were able to give those that had responded on the poll, and it was 81% of the people in attendance, some insights. I wanted to be able to pause and take some time for a Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to be able to drop those into the chat line now, and we will be happy to be able to answer them, whether they're about today's content, the aspects of the strategic sourcing and supplier management flywheel, or for example, about Kodiak Hub. Feel free to be able to drop your questions in the chat line now. Also, I wanted to be able to directly launch. If you are interested in a demonstration of Kodiak Hub to understand how technology can align with great process and the flywheel to be able to drive those relationships of your suppliers and to real results, then we'd be happy to be able to talk. You could be able to book some time with one of our experts now. Feel free to click the button simply that's on the screen here, and you can be able to come directly to our requested demo page where you can be able to get a deeper dive of the platform as well. Again, we'll just pause here for a moment and make sure that if there's any questions, you guys can feel free to drop them in the chat line now. Thank you, Herman. Thank you, Norman. Thank you, Oscar, for your guys' kind words about the content. If there is any questions, please, again, do not be shy. Feel free to ask those questions now. We're here to be able to answer. Oh, Oscar, what a great question. How do you ensure supplier buy-in to make sure that this thing is truly a self-propelling flywheel? What an awesome question. Thank you for that, Oscar. How? Well, it's like anything, right? You have one chance to make a good first impression. So you better make sure that you're giving them a supplier experience that A, is going to give them value, right? It's going to be relevant to them. It's going to recognize them when they're doing good things, but ultimately that it's going to be easy for them as well, right? Risk management, operational risk, compliance, due diligence, it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? Your suppliers have got to be engaged. We focus in our technology on the supplier experience equal to the user experience for this exact reason, right? Because without them being able to have a good experience and good access when it comes to corrective actions as well and improvements later in the process, well, then you're going to be in a tough position to have this be self-propelling. And again, communicate with them. Let them know what your strategic sourcing process looks like. Make that very clear up front so that they understand what they're going to be expected of, right? And I think that those are some of the things that make it truly self-propelling and get that supplier buy-in. It sounds very simple, you know, when I say it, but ultimately these are the things that we believe that so many people miss out on, right, as well. Gustavo, absolutely, I will be able to share the PowerPoint, no worries. And Norman, no, there's absolutely no cost associated with the demo. It's no strings attached. You know, if you would like to get to know a little bit more about our solution, maybe map the maturity of your organization back against, you know, our experts are happy to be able to talk to you. So no worries whatsoever. If there's any other questions, please feel free to be able to ask those now in the chat line. If not, Norman, yeah, typical procurement question indeed. I agree. Don't worry, you won't have to pay anything. If there is no other questions, then we will absolutely share the handout now. So there is the handout. You can feel free to download that. If you would like to have some inspiration on your framework or your way of working related back to supplier relationship management and strategic sourcing, feel free to download simply by pressing the download button. Fatini, thank you so much for your time as well. I appreciate it. Oscar, one last question. Where in the cycle do you capture the supplier's strategic priorities? I think that you do that up front, of course, after when it is that you determine that you want to work with that supplier, right? Right kind of in between when you set your strategy and when it is that you're trying to go into a relationship and start some of that due diligence. You very clearly understand, are we aligned in our long-term vision, particularly if you're looking to create a partnership rather than sourcing or buying from a commoditized vendor, in my opinion, as well. So thank you for that particular question as well, Oscar. Thank you, Norman, for your time as well. And thank you, everybody here that's been sitting in. We appreciate you engaging during today's session. If you have any questions or are interested in learning more, you can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or hop onto our website where you can be able to learn a lot more about Kodiak Hub and supplier relationship management. If there is no other questions, then we'll close down the session, and thank you very much for today.